chapter 2, and we're going to look at verses 1 through 11, and this is Jesus' first miracle. And we'll be studying, actually his first miracle is one of joy. What is the world lacking today? Joy. Along with that is love and many other things, peace and all the attributes of the Spirit of God. But we're going to look at John chapter 2, verses 1 through 11 today, and this is his first miracle. Keep in mind that as we study this, kind of what we did last week, we had the Dead Sea, and Jesus had been down there with John for the baptism, then the Sea of Galilee, and then we have Canaan and Bethsaida, all of these, and Capernaum. I can't write them all on the screen, but what Jesus had done, he had been baptized of John with John, and of course John said, "No, let me be baptized with you." And he said, "No, let it be so now." And then God's Spirit abode upon his son Jesus. And from that point on, Jesus went for 40 days into the wilderness to be tempted of Satan. And he has come back, and as he walks past John, John points him out and says, "Behold, the Lamb of God." And when he did, the apostles, or the two men that were apostles of John, followed Jesus. And that was John and Andrew. And we spoke about that, all of this last week. And then as they traveled, you could see in chapter 1, in the latter part of it, it's like the next day and the next day and then the next day. And so there's days that it's like 70 miles of walking. They did not have vehicles, electric or gas. They walked. And so as Jesus walked, he would camp or pitch his tent or whatever he was. And John and Andrew followed him and met with him that first night. And then Jesus went on and he met with Philip and Nathanael a little bit later. And we're going to come into the lesson today. Nathanael is actually from Cana. Now, Jesus had 3 days once he got here, and we're going to see about that. And I'm not sure how he went about this, but through this, he gathered together his apostles during this period of time. And then they went to the wedding in Cana. And so let's take our text, chapter 2 and verse number 1, and we will see, and we'll read down through verse 11, and then we'll come back and pick it up. "And the third day there was a marriage in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. And both Jesus was called and his disciples to the marriage. And when they wanted wine, his mother, the mother of Jesus, saith unto him, They have no wine. And Jesus said unto her, Woman, what have I to do with thee? Mine hour is not yet come. His mother saith unto the servants, Whatever he saith, you do it." And matter of fact, that's pretty good advice. If you're a child of God, whatever he says, just do it, right? You have that on our T-shirts, just do it. And then say, Jesus said, just do it. Whatever I say do it. But she gave some pretty good advice. And there were set there 6 water pots of stone after the manner of the purifying of the Jews, containing 2 or 3 firkins apiece. And Jesus saith unto them, Fill the water pots with water. And they filled them up to the brim. And he saith unto them, Draw out now, and bear unto the governor of the feast, and they bare it. And when the ruler of the feast had tasted the water that was made wine, and knew not whence it was, but the servants which drew the water knew, the governor of the feast called the bridegroom, and saith unto him, every man at the beginning doth set forth good wine, and when men are well drunk, now that's, you can circle that word, or not, when they've had a lot to drink, then you bring out the bad wine, that which is worse. But thou hast kept the good wine until now. Now this beginning of miracles did Jesus in Cana of Galilee, and manifested forth his glory, and his disciples believed in him. So what do we have here? We have the very first miracle of Jesus. Now the other Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, do not record this one. They are the Synoptic Gospels. And do you all know the difference between the Synoptic Gospels and the Gospel of John? I don't know if I've mentioned this before. I may have. Matthew, Mark, and Luke, most believe Mark was written first. And Matthew and Luke, it's kind of like they took Mark, read that, and then they filled in empty blanks, empty spaces, and maybe took some of the same miracles and looked at it in a different light. Each one is presenting Jesus differently to a different group of people. Matthew was a wealthy tax collector, but he was a disciple of Jesus. Actually, Matthew and John are the only two disciples of the Gospels. All the Gospels, all four Gospels are God-breathed. They say exactly what God wanted to say. There's not an error in them, even though there may be some little bit of conflicts, and you could look at it and say, well, this one says this happened to this, and this one said it happened that. But it's all God-breathed. It's all spoken as man's voice. It's like I would sit down and write something, and my handwriting or my writing is not near as legible as some others. We might say exactly what we have, what God has given us to say, but what I would write would be different than what somebody else would write, even though we might say the same things, or basically. So when you say the Synoptic Gospels, you have two words that are brought together to make this synoptic. What if I say they were synchronized? What was that? What would that word mean? Have you ever seen synchronized swimming, or synchronized dancing? They are all alike. They're pretty much alike. And then if I was to say optics, it's what you see, right? So what it's saying when someone says the Matthew, Mark, and Luke are the Synoptic Gospels, what it is saying is you can have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and you could go down the list, and each one would have almost the same stories. One might add one that's a little different. One might be, and they would all be pretty much synchronized in their stories. Like I say, if Mark wrote first, and Matthew and Luke studied Mark, and they set about to write, they would see where Mark may have not have said something or may have embellished something, or may have said something that happened in their mind a little differently. And so they are pretty much alike. You could sit down and look at those three Gospels, and they're like, okay, these are the same miracles, the same things that happened and the same things that happened. They're synoptic. You understand? Well, John isn't. John is unique. We have our first miracle not even recorded in the others. And you would think that the first miracle would be an important miracle. Another thing about John's gospel is he explains how the apostles were called. The others do not explain that. Now, you may see in their gospel where Jesus went up to Peter and Andrew and Peter and said, "Come follow me." And so there's two different places as you follow the calling of the apostles. The first is their introduction to Jesus. And as they were coming up, they were introduced to Jesus, and several of them were just introduced to Jesus. But then during this other period of time, Jesus called them to follow him. So there's no contradictions when you read the Gospel of John is unique in its character. John was written probably 30 years after these others were written. The influences of John's writing was totally different from these others. Sure, he probably read each one of the Gospels that was written before. Now, these were letters. You understand that, right? They weren't like Gospels, Matthew chapter 1, verse number 2 or 3. They were just continual letters or books, per se, that were written just right on through, no chapter titles or anything like that. John's totally different in so many aspects. And it's a stronger theological book than the others, though all of them give the gospel message. But Luke was written to present Jesus as Son of Man. Mark, suffering servant. Matthew, the King of Kings. And John, he is the Son of God. John wrote and said, Jesus is God. So we're going to see today that this right here, Jesus, it says here, the third day. So to begin with, John has chronologically ordered this all the way from Jesus leaving the Dead Sea all the way up to Cana. And remember who was from Cana? Nathanael was from Cana. That's another thing. In the calling of the apostles, the last 5, we don't really have a record of their calling. We know they were called, and we know that they were called because of their service for him, and Jesus told them to come follow him. But we don't really have a record of their calling. We have a record of, I think it works out, Simon. So we have Simon, Peter, right? And then we have Andrew, and then we have James, and then we have John, and then we have Matthew, and then we have Thomas. Now, all of you know those names, right? How do we know Thomas? We don't see where Thomas was called to be an apostle, but we do know he was there when Jesus said, "Put your finger here into the holes in my hand and into my side." Now, who are the other? What is there left? 4? Here's an easy way to remember it. We have J, S, J, J. Okay? So, all of you know these. You should already just be able to click those off. I mean, if you've read the Bible at all, you should know those. Well, the first one we have is James, the less. There is someone here that calls me that every now and then. And I explained this morning that I'm less than that. I'm not even to be considered with these guys. The son of Alphaeus, they call him. The other is a man named Simon. Now, he is called Simon the Canaanite, and I think Matthew, Mark, and John. Luke gives us a little bit more. He says he's a zealot, Z-E-L-O-T. He has zelotes. You know what this word means? It means he's a man of zeal. He would be Simon. This Simon here would be an exciting person to be around. He's a zealous person. And I like that when I find out individuals and a little bit of their characters. I like to know that. Even though these are, only time they are mentioned in the Bible are generally in a list of the 12 disciples. But there's more to that than what you read. It's like Matthew in chapter Luke, I think verse number 6. He was wealthy. He called a big party and had Jesus invited to the big party once Jesus called him to follow him. And I think that's when he mentioned that if I owe anybody anything, I'll restore fourfold. Then we have a couple Judas. This Judas here is also called Thaddeus. And this Judas here is a man named Iscariot. And so you know them. So JJ, JS, JJ. You all know that, right? So I expect on the test next week that you will know the 12 apostles. I have to have tricks to memorize things. I just do. And so these are the apostles. The Bible here in this chapter says Jesus was called and the disciples, his disciples. So was it all 12? I think it probably was. When I first looked at it, I thought maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was just the first, Andrew and Peter and James and John and Philip and Nathaniel. But it looks like it was a little more. So anyways, what we have here is, let me see. What do we have here? All right, the guest list. Well, we pretty well explained that. It's Mary, and it is also the disciples. You have the wedding party. This had to be a big wedding. Jesus was Mary. They were from Nazareth, which was close. Nazareth is right about here. So it's obviously walking distance, which everybody did. And there were other people that were from Capernaum and other people from around the sea that joined up for this wedding. So it had to be somebody that was pretty well known. Mary, her being there, I don't know if you can imagine this, but if you would go to my house at any party that's going on, my wife is doing all the work. Everybody else is in her way. So I can see Mary being the person that's kind of taken and doing the jobs, the menial tasks that need to be done. We're going to be introduced to a person called the governor, and he's also called ruler. And both of those words would indicate he is somebody of very high importance. But in reality, when you look at the Greek word, it basically means he's the head waiter. So he's going to be there. And what that means is when you have a big party, it's kind of like it's like a wedding planner. You know what I'm saying? They make sure that all the tables are set exactly right and everybody's being fed and there's enough food and there's enough things that are happening and so that it goes smoothly. For the worst thing that can happen at a wedding, well, there's a lot of worse things that could happen at a wedding. But one of the bad things could happen at the reception or pre-wedding celebrations would be to run out of food, or in this case, they run out of wine. And so here we have that they have a need, and that need is found in verse number 3. When they wanted wine, the mother of Jesus said to them, "They have no wine." So, but listen. If you were at a party and they run out of beverage, Cokes, Pepsi, wine, whatever, what would you do? Go buy some. Go buy some. I want you today, I want you to spend a moment and think about a woman. Her name is Mary. As a 13 to 14-year-old girl, Gabriel pays her a visit and says, "You're going to have a baby." Now, folks, that's going to put you into shock. And he says and tells her that this is going to be the Son of God. She goes down to Bethlehem, has this baby in a manger. And y'all have been on a farm, you know what that's like. But it was cleaned out. And shepherds come and say they've seen the star. And then wise men come and shower them with gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh. We know why later, because they had to escape into Egypt and hide for a couple years before they went back up to Nazareth. We understand why that happened. But imagine, as just a little girl, having a baby that she knows is not her husband's, and he knows it's not his. And now put yourself in her place. For the next 12 years, this little boy grows up. She knows who he is. There's no question. Mary never in the wildest dream ever questioned what happened to her. Understand, she raised this child up. She had other children. I can imagine that the other children, every now and then, got a belt around their backside. Other children had to be disciplined for not doing right. But Jesus was perfect. He was human. If he slammed a finger, his father was a carpenter. If he had hit his thumb with a hammer, he would have had the same feeling of pain that you and I had, yet he would not sin. I don't even understand that. He grew up, and she knew from the very beginning. At age 12, I can imagine the fear as she got away and then realized she had left him behind. Any mother would be in shock that they now have to travel back a day and find their son, and it was like 3 days they had missed him. Imagine that, and then Jesus said, "Don't you know I need to be about my Father's business?" She knew. And now for the next few years, up until age 30, Jesus has already been announced by John as the Son of God, which taketh away the sin of the world. Jesus has come back from his time with Satan and has conquered and defeated him. And Jesus has now gathered together a group of disciples, and they're with him. He's of age. And Mary, she ain't going to go out and buy any liquor. She's not going to go out and buy wine. She puts it on her son. You make it. Now, she knows Jesus, her son, is the Son of God. She knows it. Sometimes it's one of those boggle your mind things. I can't understand it because I'm not a woman. You women that have bore children and raised children, you know more about this than I would ever know. Jesus said unto her, woman. Now, that is not a sign of disrespect. What probably would have been more of disrespect is to call her Mary. I never called my father Bill. I never called my mother Charlotte. My dad called her Tweedy, or Tweed. For some reason, he called her Tweed, so I don't exactly know. Her middle name was Tweedy. She was a Tweedy when my grandpa Tweedy was, anyways, her child. But you don't call them by your mother by the first name. But it was not uncommon to call them woman. It's almost a term like mother. In 1 Kings chapter 2 and verse 20, when Bathsheba came in to Solomon, her son, he said, Mother, what do you want? I'm not going to go into the story there, but boy, what a story to read. 1 Kings chapter 1 and 2. Wow, what a powerful story. But anyway, we go on. In Galatians chapter 4 and verse 4, it says, but when the fullness of time was come, God sent forth his Son, made of a woman, made under the law. So she wanted her will accomplished. And perhaps Jesus is saying to her, it's not about your will. It's about God's will for me. You understand? It's not about what you want, Mary, woman. It's about what God wants for me. And so he says to her, mine hour is not yet come. And there's some verses you can compare that with. Mary said unto the servants, whatsoever he says, do it. That's a pretty good thing. That's a mother's heart. I wrote in here let me see. I don't have a lot of time, but you can read what I wrote from Pulpit Commentary. The conversation probably carried on for a little longer. It was more said than what was just said. And then she says, whatsoever he saith unto you, do it. And now the request is met. There were 6 water pots of stone, the manner of purifying of the Jews, containing 2 to 3 firkins apiece. Now, I know these words, we don't know what they mean, but a firkin, it could be around 9 gallons. So 2 to 3 would be 18 to 27 gallons per water pot. Now, this is kind of important for you to understand. If Jesus made 1 pitcher of wine, well, a magician might do that. I mean, I've watched these magicians, illusionists, do all kinds of tricks. Understand, this was 100 to 150, and I think it's more like 108 to 160 something gallons of wine. Now, where are they going to get the water? I grew up on a farm in Missouri. For a period of time, I lived in Aunt Sally's house in Lock Springs, Missouri. It was an old farmhouse. My bed, when it snowed in the wintertime, it would literally come through the window. It'd be on the inside of the windowsill. And then our heater was a wood stove. If you wanted water, Jim could go down and pump it at the well and bring it in. And going down to the well was easy if you understand the word down. Going up with 2 buckets of water was a little more difficult. This is why I'm so strong today. So each gallon of water weighs 8.3 pounds. These men brought in over 1,000 pounds of water. Are you kind of getting a picture here? This is a lot of water. and believe me, they know what they brought was water. There's not a question on their mind as to what they brought. And how many trips it took for them to get 1,000 pounds or 100 gallons to 150, even 125 gallons, how much water it took to fill those up. So what I'm saying is, when Christ performed a miracle, it was a miracle. And not just that, but there were witnesses to the miracle. It wasn't something done in a secret. And it was a perfect miracle. These men, when they came in, I don't know how much they knew, but they filled those water pots, the Bible said, to the brim. There's a song I was going to quote to you. I don't have time today. And it's a cute song. And it's the chorus goes, I'm drinking from my saucer. Or what is it? My cup overfloweth, and I'm drinking from my saucer. Listen, that's what the joy of the Lord is. You know, you can have an earthly joy, which is nothing more than a happiness. But when the joy of the Lord fills your soul, I mean it overflowing, that's an amazing time in your life. And I pray that God has given you experiences where the joy of the Lord has overflowed in your soul. These men filled those water pots all the way full. And then he says, draw out now. Now, can you imagine? They probably had some kind of pitcher, and they would take a ladle and draw that out and pour it in. They put water. They got wine. What? And they take it to the head waiter and said, look at this. Look at this. And they drank it, and it was the best wine they had ever tasted. Now let me say something and be very plain here. Never in your wildest imagination would you ever think that Jesus created a fermented, corrupt wine. No man is going to get drunk on the wine that he gave them. They're going to have joy like they've never had before, but they ain't going to get drunk and fall down and slobber and throw up and make a fool of themselves. This was good stuff. And so they bare to the governor of the feast. They bare it and they tasted it. And so we have the witnesses. And he said unto him, every man sets forth the good wine. But you've given us until they get drunk and then the worst. But you've given us the best and last. Then the last thing we have, this beginning of miracles did Jesus in Cana of Galilee. And what did he do? He manifested forth his glory. And one of the important things is, and his disciples, this is the most important. The disciples believed in him. In verse number 23 of this same chapter, it says, many believed in his name when they saw the miracles which he did. And then if you go to chapter 20 and verse 31, it says, but these are written. Many things could have been written. But these are written that you might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you might have life through his name. So next week, this young man named Jesus is going to go to Passover and make a name for himself there. Not one that everyone liked, because he goes in and disrupts the people selling doves and things on the streets. And he turns over their tables and throws their money all over the place. And they get a little bit upset at him. So we'll study that a little bit next week. Okay? Thank you, folks, for being here and being faithful today. I know it's a holiday. People kept asking me, am I going to stay at the ranch? And I said, no, I've got better things to do than the ranch. I want to be here with you. Let's bow our heads in prayer. Father, thank you for this wonderful day. Thank you for our church, our pastor, his leadership. I pray this morning you'll give him strength, empower him in your word, and use him to honor you. In Jesus' precious name, amen.